Having a great game is not necessarily what makes you a sustainable developer. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on GameRanx, here's 15 companies with great games that went bankrupt. Number 15 is Hudson Soft, the developers of Bomberman, and yes, Mario Party, who actually didn't have a terrible business plan or anything. They didn't collapse due to their games doing very badly due to a lack of promotion or anything like that. Their games have been beloved throughout the entire time they've existed. Developers need financing money, and oftentimes that money is tied up in banks. Hudson Soft's main bank totally collapsed in 1999 and 2000, and in order to finance their operations, they put themselves in the stock market. Gradually, Konami stepped in and bought more and more of Hudson Soft stock and eventually became their full owner. A lot of their Japanese employees were absorbed by Konami, but as an actual company, Hudson Soft doesn't really exist anymore. It's just the Hudson brand, and that's often not even used, and you can see on the new Super Bomberman that it's specifically attributed to Konami. Number 14 is Mythic Entertainment, the studio behind Dark Age of Camelot, Warhammer Online, and yes, Ultima Online. At least they were the developer that maintained it from 2006 to 2014. Now, Mythic Entertainment had an interesting sort of history. It was bought by EA, was kept around as EA Mythic for quite a while, and then in 2012 it was changed back to Mythic Entertainment. EA then closed the location in Fairfax, Virginia, which had been its headquarters the entire existence of the company, and relocated some of Mythic's staff into a new studio called Broadsword, where they now currently maintain Ultima Online, as well as Dark Age of Camelot. Number 13 is Broderbund, who made Prince of Persia, as well as a lot of educational games, including Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Most of these games are now published by Ubisoft, which you have to listen to how this happened. In 1995, Broderbund tried to purchase the Learning Company, but they were outbid by another company that bought the Learning Company and just changed its name to the Learning Company. That much bigger Learning Company then bought Broderbund in 1998 after some strategic acquisitions that weakened Broderbund's position in the market. Now, all of that was rolled into the Learning Company, and that version of the Learning Company was bought by Ubisoft as well as an Irish company called Riverdeep. The Broderbund name went to Riverdeep, and all of their games and entertainment holdings went to Ubisoft. Number 12 is Red 5 Studios, who is creating the free-to-play science fiction, massively multiplayer online shooter, which was pretty well received. In March 2010, Red 5 was acquired by Chinese company The Nine, and over the next 6 years had a somewhat tumultuous history regarding the game, and then kind of mysteriously fired everybody in July of 2016. This is one of those strange ones where you kind of just don't know what the hell happened. They had a product that people liked, but they also had a company that apparently didn't like them, and that company unfortunately owned them, in more than one sense of the word. Number 11 is Acclaim Entertainment, which has a really storied history. They were always one of those opportunistic companies. They made a lot of licensed games, they ported all the Mortal Kombat games in the 90s, and the ultimate reason that they went down was a decline in game sales. I'd say it was because they didn't really have a whole lot of extremely recognizable or really that great IPs. In 2004, they filed for both Chapter 11 and then Chapter 7 bankruptcy, basically completely destroying their company, liquidating everything to pay off debt which topped $100 million. In 2006, Throwback Entertainment bought a bunch of the IPs from Acclaim, and as of 2014, Collector Vision owns the Acclaim brand. There was one attempt to restart Acclaim a while back, but it kind of failed almost immediately, so, I mean, not a lot of people really care, I think. And it's not that their games weren't good, because they usually were. For instance, all those Mortal Kombat ports were single-handedly responsible for a lot of the explosion of video gaming in the 1990s. It's just they didn't make the games, and they didn't really come up with any ideas of their own that stuck. Number 10 is Troika Games, a studio founded by designers of Fallout, the original Fallout in 1997, who were working on the sequel to Fallout and kind of didn't like how things were going. They left that project, founded Troika, and released a game in which a fantasy setting was going through an industrial revolution called Arcanium of Steamworks and Magic Obscura. It wasn't a particularly polished game, but still got very good reviews. Ultimately, Troika, however, did not manage to really gain a huge following, and it had to disband in late 2004 and early 2005. Two of the three founders ended up going to Obsidian and making Pillars of Eternity, so I don't know, maybe it's good that that happened? Number 10, Shiny Entertainment, the creators of Earthworm Jim, which if you've ever played that game, you know exactly how good it is. It's perhaps one of the best shooter platformer games ever made, and they were also responsible for 2 Matrix games that, although they were very unpolished and not necessarily perfect, were probably the best Matrix games. During the development of the first of those, Shiny had been sold to what could be most simply described as the company that is now Atari. We'll talk about Atari later. But that ended up not working out very well, and they had to shut the doors. They merged the Shiny employees with the Collective employees and formed Double Helix Games. Number 9 is 3DO, which made a console of its own that pretty much failed. They had a bad business model. 3DO only took $3 per royalty, which put them in a very nice position compared to Nintendo and Sega. However, their console cost $700, which was more than the Nintendo and Sega consoles combined in price. That failed, and they ended up actually doing some interesting games. For one, the Might and Magic and Heroes of Might and Magic series, Army Men, as well as one of the first 3D MMORPGs, Meridian 59, all came out during that period of time, and it worked out rather well, except, well, they weren't making money. By 2003, they had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and that was pretty much that for them. Number 8, Maxis, the creators of SimCity, The Sims, and various other things, who have in all actuality been very successful through the years, but Maxis just allowed itself to be acquired by Electronic Arts, and Electronic Arts didn't really want to keep all of the offices open. They closed a lot of the Maxis offices, spun off a company called The Sim Studio, and Maxis essentially just functions as a brand now. Number 7 is Bullfrog, who created Dungeon Keeper, Theme Park, Populous, Magic Carpet, just an endless number of very good games. They were Peter Molyneux's original company. They were bought by EA. The EA acquisition happened in January 1995, a year after Molyneux became the Electronic Arts vice president. However, in '97, he left to found Lionhead Studios, and not really a lot happened with Bullfrog after that, and it closed its doors in 2001. Number 6, Westwood Studios, the people behind Command & Conquer, are another EA victim, but we'll get into that in just a second. As they were becoming more successful, they were actually bought by Virgin Interactive. They started out with a reputation for shipping products late, but by the mid-90s had been known for doing a very good job of shipping products on time that were fantastic. Virgin Interactive sold them to Electronic Arts for about $120 million. Westwood was so big at this time, they had about 6% of the PC game market to themselves. But when EA bought them out, a lot of Westwood employees just quit. They didn't like the idea of being run by EA because EA had a lot of, well, rules, demands, culture stuff that the Westwood employees just thought wasn't good. A lot of these games ended up being canceled, and it was eventually shuttered in 2003 because, well, it wasn't able to keep up what it was when it was the original Westwood. Number 5 is THQ, which was somewhere between a game publisher and a game developer. It was a lot like Acclaim in that it did a lot of licensed games, but it did eventually create its own IPs that were pretty sweet. For instance, Red Faction, as well as Saints Row, were both developed under the THQ labels. THQ actually owned Volition at the time, and ended up with some surprise hits. However, they weren't enough to manage to keep the company around, and it had defaulted on a $50 million loan from Wells Fargo. That started a chain of events where they continually lost more and more money. They had to sell away rights to things like the Warhammer 40,000 series, and were just left with things that ended up not having a lot of very good value to them, and they weren't able to make the kind of money they needed to. The THQ brand was bought up by Nordic Games, who now calls themselves THQ, but it's not the same company. Number 4 is Origin Systems, the creators of Ultima and Wing Commander, who were also a victim of the Electronic Arts buyout process. You see, the reason why Electronic Arts would buy these companies is because they had achieved a certain level of success, their brand was worthwhile, and they had a lot of IP that EA thought they could make money with. But what turned out to happen is that every time EA did this, it just basically brought everything to a screeching halt for these brands. Sure, it would bring a lot of money in for the people who founded these companies, and they would basically ride off into the sunset quite wealthy. Origin operated under EA from the years of 1992 to 2004, which is a pretty impressive run, but a lot of that time they operated independently, and once EA started meddling, that was basically when the demise happened. Number 3 is Atari, and Atari is a company name that has been around since 1972. The original Atari, the pioneer company that made lots of consoles, arcade games, and computer games, was dissolved in 1984 due to the fact that the video game industry crashed. They did not have enough money to stick around, and that was that for them. But the Atari brand was considered very lucrative, and although it had crashed and essentially burned, other companies such as GE GT Interactive, Infogrames, and Hasbro Interactive have all owned various stakes in the name Atari over the years. In 1993, GT Interactive was founded, and a few years later, 1999, Infogrames bought it, and the merged company was called Infogrames, who eventually bought the Atari name, and that is exactly who they go by now. It is not the original Atari that is still around, but they are attempting to be Atari, and this version of the company kind of has their shit together. At least it seems. Number 2 is Interplay, a company that really did a great job innovating a lot of really great games, like, well, the original Fallout came from them, Baldur's Gate, Descent, which is, in my opinion, one of the best games of all time, and they were BioWare's original publisher. When you're talking about Interplay, you think, well, why aren't they still around? There was a lot of success there. Well, guess what happened to them? They got sued a lot for doing stuff that they weren't supposed to continue doing, like selling Fallout stuff after their Fallout license expired because they'd sold all of it to Bethesda. And you don't win a lawsuit against Bethesda unless you also have Bethesda money. In 2016, they ended up having to just sell all of their intellectual property, and now a lot of people have all of their property. So that's that. And finally, number 1 is 3D Realms, which was a company that produced Duke Nukem and really had some very interesting developments in the 3D shooter. For instance, Duke Nukem was the first one that allowed 2 rooms to be on top of each other, making it closer to a true 3D game. They started working on a sequel to Duke Nukem 3D in 1997, and it didn't come out until they ran out of money and had to sell the rights to the franchise. This is why there is still Shadow Warrior. This is why Duke Nukem Forever finally came out and all that. I don't really know how to categorize what happened to these guys. It seems like they just, on some level, were perfectionists, on some level were control freaks, and ended up just kind of ruining their company over it. Once they were finally able to get away from all those habits and lost basically everything, I don't know if they got humbled or they just realized they had to work on things that they could release. They made a new game called Bombshell, released it, and it's pretty good. Came out about a year ago, and it's a good game. Took them 2 years to develop, and they just released it. If only they had done that, for the previous decade and a half. What happened with all these developers was always very different, except for the cases of EA, then it was just basically the same. Which company out of this do you miss the most? Or if they're still around and have managed to evade the whole going out of business thing despite pretty much being decimated, what about those companies do you miss the most? Leave a comment, we're really interested in what you have to say, and if you enjoyed this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed, now would be a good time to do so. We upload brand new videos every single day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon, you can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time, right here on GameRanx.